Elias Kane had fought in the bloodiest battles of the war. He had seen entire cities reduced to rubble, fleets of warships torn apart in the void, and the last cries of dying soldiers echoing through shattered transmissions. The war between humanity and the Vari had been long and merciless, but Earth had emerged victorious. Now Elias was just another soldier with nowhere to go, adrift in a universe he had helped shape with blood and fire. He walked the cold steel corridors of Black Site Eos, an orbital detention center floating above the ruins of the Vari homeworld. The war had ended, but its consequences lingered in the prisoners held within these walls, what remained of the once mighty Vari species. Most of them were soldiers, commanders, or scientists, but the two detainees Elias had been called for were something else entirely. "This is their cell," the security officer muttered beside him, inputting a code into the control panel. The door's locking mechanism hissed in protest. "They haven't eaten, haven't moved. The others won't go near them." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Why?" The guard exhaled sharply. "They're breeders." Elias frowned. He had heard of them. Vari designed not for war, but for survival. The Vari's expansion across the stars had been fueled by their ability to engineer their own kind for specific roles, and the breeders were the most prized of them all. They weren't just mates. They were living keystones of their species' reproduction, biologically programmed to bond, to belong to someone. Without that, they faded, died. He had always assumed those were just rumors, until now. The reinforced door slid open, revealing a dimly lit cell. Two figures knelt in the center of the room, wrapped in what remained of elegant, flowing robes now torn and dirtied. Their silver-tinged skin shimmered in the low light, their long hair cascaded around, their shoulders like molten platinum. They were Vari, but unlike any Elias had encountered before. Not warriors, not conquerors. When he stepped forward, they moved in unison, but not away, toward him. With startling urgency, they fell to their knees before him, their slender fingers grasping at his uniform as if he were the last solid thing in a collapsing universe. "You are human," the taller one said, her violet eyes burning with something primal. "You are strong." The other, more delicate, her breath unsteady, whispered, "You must choose us." Elias stiffened. A cold warning curled at the base of his spine. "I don't know what you think is going to happen," he said slowly, "but I'm not. Please." The taller one's hands trembled against his. "Without a bond, we will die." The smaller one, her voice fragile but unyielding, echoed, "Make us yours, or let us die." Elias had been through hell and back, had seen death in all its merciless forms. But this was different. This wasn't fear. This was something far more dangerous. And for the first time in a long, long while, he didn't know what to do. Elias took a slow step back, shaking off the trembling hands that clung to him. The two alien women didn't resist, but their eyes never left him. The taller one's gaze was sharp, calculating, filled with a quiet strength. The smaller one looked fragile, her breath unsteady, as if each moment was a struggle. "What do you mean you'll die?" Elias demanded. His voice came out harsher than he intended, but he didn't care. He had been thrown into the fire too many times to let emotion cloud his judgment. The taller one lowered her head slightly, her silver-white hair falling over her shoulders. "We are breeders. Our existence depends on bonding. Without a chosen mate, our bodies fail." Elias narrowed his eyes. "Fail? Like starvation?" The smaller one pressed a hand against her chest, as if steadying herself. "Not starvation, degradation." The taller one exhaled, frustration flickering across her face. "Our genetic structure was designed for symbiosis. When we bond, our biology stabilizes. When we do not, our bodies begin to shut down. Slowly, painfully." Elias crossed his arms, skeptical. And no one else here could help you? There are plenty of prisoners in this facility. The taller one's lips pressed into a thin line. We tried. The smaller one shuddered, her arms wrapping around herself. They rejected us. Elias frowned. The war had left deep scars, and he had no doubt that many in the facility harbored nothing but hatred for the Vari. But this was different. They refused you? He asked. Why? The taller one hesitated, then finally spoke. Because a bond is irreversible. A heavy silence settled between them. Elias felt something cold coil in his stomach. He had read enough reports during the war to know that the Vari's genetic engineering went beyond mere survival tactics. Bonding wasn't just a biological necessity for them. It was permanent. He let out a slow breath, his mind racing. You're saying if I bond with you, if I do whatever it is you're asking, I can't take it back? The smaller one shook her head. No, never. The taller one met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Once we are bound to you, we are yours. Elias clenched his jaw. This was insanity. He wasn't some savior, some hero to be clung to. He was a soldier, a killer. The war had taken everything from him, his friends, his future, even his faith in humanity. And now, these two were asking for something he wasn't sure he even had left to give. I can't, he said at last, his voice quieter than before. The taller one inhaled sharply, as if struck. The smaller one let out a soft whimper, her fingers digging into the fabric of her ruined robes. You do not understand, the taller one whispered. Her voice, for the first time, held something Elias wasn't expecting. Fear. We are already fading, the smaller one murmured. Every moment without a bond, we die a little more. Elias ran a hand through his short-cropped hair, frustration mounting. He didn't ask for this, he didn't want this, but when he looked at them, truly looked, he saw the truth in their words. Their silver skin was pale, dull, lacking the vibrant sheen Vari were known for. Their limbs trembled slightly, not out of weakness, but something deeper, something breaking apart from the inside. And worst of all, they weren't begging for survival, they were begging for him. Elias exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. Damn it! He had survived countless battles. He had fought against impossible odds. But this might be the hardest fight yet. Elias paced the length of the cell, jaw clenched, mind racing. This was insane. He had fought the Vari for years, killed them on the battlefield without hesitation. And now, two of them were kneeling before him, pleading for something he couldn't begin to comprehend. The taller one, stronger, more composed, watched him with quiet intensity. The smaller one shivered, her silver-tinged skin even paler than before. Elias had seen men dying in the field, their bodies shutting down from injury or exhaustion. He recognized that same fading light in her. He hated it. How does it work? He finally asked, rubbing a hand over his face. This bond of yours. The taller one tilted her head slightly. It is instinctual, a connection formed through touch, through will. She hesitated. It is not just physical, it is deeper. The smaller one swallowed hard. Once it happens, we are bound. To you, forever. Elias stiffened. That word, forever, felt like a noose tightening around his throat. And if I refuse, he asked, though he already knew the answer. The taller one exhaled. Then we die. A long silence stretched between them. The weight of their words settled over him like a suffocating blanket. Elias had lost too much to this war. He had nothing left, not family, not purpose. He wasn't a leader, a protector, or whatever these women needed him to be. But he wasn't a monster either. And no matter how much he wanted to turn his back and walk away, he knew he wouldn't. With a sigh, he crouched down before them, resting his elbows on his knees. He was close enough now to see the faint tremble in their limbs, the desperate hope lingering behind their exhaustion. "What happens to me if I do this?" he asked. The smaller one perked up slightly, her violet eyes shimmering with fragile hope. The taller one, ever cautious, studied him carefully. "You will feel the bond. You will know us, as we will know you." Elias narrowed his eyes. "That's vague as hell." The taller one's lips pressed into a thin line, because no human has ever done it before. Elias swore under his breath. Of course. The war had wiped out any chance of peaceful contact between their species. Humanity had never even studied the Vari in this way. Whatever was about to happen, he'd be the first. The smaller one reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing against his hand. A sharp jolt raced up his arm, not painful, but electric, alive, something old and primal waking inside him. His breath caught. She gasped, eyes widening. "It's starting." The taller one placed her hand over his as well, and suddenly, it was as if something clicked inside him. A presence, two presences, slipping into the edges of his mind, not intruding but waiting, watching. Elias's heart pounded. He had faced death more times than he could count, but nothing had ever terrified him like this. Elias's breath came sharp and uneven as the strange sensation crawled through his skin, deeper, threading itself into something beyond flesh and bone. It was as if unseen tendrils of energy were weaving between him and the two alien women, binding them in ways he couldn't yet understand. The taller one, strong, composed, exhaled softly, her silver lashes fluttering as something like relief flickered across her face. The smaller one's eyes gleamed with an almost desperate reverence, her fingers trembling where they touched his hand. "It's happening," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Elias clenched his jaw. What exactly is happening? The taller one, ever controlled, searched his face as if choosing her words carefully. "The bond is forming. Our bodies are recognizing you as ours." "Ours?" Elias repeated, his stomach tightening. The smaller one let out a shuddering sigh. "Yes, ours." A warmth, alien yet strangely familiar, unfurled in Elias's chest. It wasn't like anything he had ever felt before. It wasn't attraction, not quite desire, but something deeper, like an unspoken promise, an invisible tether connecting them. His soldier's instincts screamed at him to pull away, to reject this, but another part of him, something primal, held him still. Then the pain hit. A sudden burning heat spread from the point of contact, rushing through his veins like wildfire. Elias gasped, his body tensing as if it had been struck by an unseen force. He swore under his breath, muscles locking, his vision momentarily blurring. "What the hell?" The smaller one whimpered, fingers tightening around his. "It hurts." "Because you're resisting," Elias grit his teeth. Resisting? Of course he was resisting. He didn't ask for this. Didn't choose this. He had fought his entire life for control. Control over the battlefield, over his own fate. But now, control was slipping through his fingers. The taller one leaned in, pressing her palm against his chest. The moment she did, the fire dulled, not gone, but tamed, contained, as if soothed by her presence. "We are not forcing you," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "But the bond has begun. If you reject it now, it will tear us apart." Elias groaned, squeezing his eyes shut. He could feel them, inside him, not just physically, but deeper, as if something unseen was threading them together. Their pain, their fear, their desperate hope. He swallowed hard. "And if I accept it?" The smaller one's grip trembled. "Then we survive." The taller one's voice was softer now, And you will never be alone again. Elias let out a slow, shaky breath. Never alone. A dangerous promise. A terrifying one. And yet, as the warmth of the bond wrapped around him, he wasn't sure he wanted to fight it anymore. Elias had spent his life surviving. Every battle, every mission, every damn breath had been a struggle against the inevitable, against the universe that seemed determined to take everything from him. But this was different. The bond wasn't just something he could feel. It was alive inside him, a pulse that wasn't his own, two presences intertwining with his own like threads woven into the same fabric. The sensation was strange, almost overwhelming, but not unwelcome. The smaller one, Lirien. Her name surfaced in his mind as if it had always been there. He could feel her, not just beside him, but within him, like a whisper at the edge of his thoughts. She was fragile, desperate for connection, clinging to the warmth of the bond like it was the only thing keeping her breathing. And the taller one, Seris. She was different, stronger, more controlled. She held herself with the quiet dignity of a warrior, but beneath it, Elias sensed something else, a deep, aching loneliness buried beneath years of discipline. Their emotions bled into him, raw and unguarded. It should have scared him, but it didn't. Elias let out a slow breath, glancing between them. So, what now? Lirien's lips parted slightly, her violet eyes shimmering with something like wonder. You accepted us, she murmured. You chose us. Seris exhaled, tension draining from her shoulders. Then we live. Elias frowned. That's it? Seris shook her head. No, the bond is still young, unstable. It will take time to settle, to fully connect. And until then? Elias pressed. Lirien shifted closer, her fingers grazing his hand again, sending a shiver through his nerves. Until then, we stay together. Elias hesitated, the weight of those words pressing against his chest. He had spent years keeping people at arm's length, losing too many to let himself grow attached. And yet, now, he could feel their very existence entwined with his. A part of him wanted to pull away, to sever the connection before it rooted itself too deep. But another part, a part he didn't fully understand, couldn't. Before he could respond, a sudden crash echoed through the facility, followed by the blaring of alarms. Elias's instincts fled to life, trouble. Seris's expression hardened, her battle instincts just as sharp. They've found us. Lirien's breath hitched. No, too soon. Elias's mind snapped into focus, years of combat training, taking over. It didn't matter what had just happened between them. Right now, they needed to survive. He grabbed both of their hands, pulling them to their feet. Then we run. The bond thrummed between them, stronger than before. And, for the first time in years, Elias wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for them. The facility shook with the force of an explosion, the alarms wailing like dying machines. Red warning lights flickered, casting long shadows down the cold metal corridors. Elias tightened his grip on Lirien and Seris, adrenaline surging through him. They had to move, now. Boots pounded against the floors in the distance. Guards, soldiers, or worse. Elias had seen what happened to prisoners who resisted. He wasn't about to let these two fall into enemy hands. Lirien gasped as another tremor rocked the facility, nearly stumbling, but Elias caught her before she could fall. She clung to him, fingers trembling against his arm, her body weaker than before. The bond had slowed her decline, but it wasn't enough. Seris, ever the warrior, scanned the path ahead with cold precision. There's a maintenance shaft near the southern exit. If we can get there before the lockdown, then let's move. Elias pulled Lirien closer, keeping his gun in his free hand as they ran. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning metal. The facility was falling apart, either from an attack or a self-destruct sequence. He couldn't tell, and right now he didn't care. They reached the junction where the corridors split, one leading to the outer cells, the other toward the maintenance tunnels. Then the gunfire started. Bullets ricocheted off the walls, sparks flying as guards stormed in from the far end of the hall. "Down!" Elias shoved both women against the wall, returning fire in short, precise bursts. Years of combat training took over. His movements automatic, his mind cold and focused. One guard dropped, then another, but more were coming. Seris pulled a knife from the strap on her thigh. He hadn't even noticed she had a weapon, and lunged forward with the grace of a predator. In one fluid motion, she slit the throat of the nearest guard and pivoted, using his own rifle to take down the next. Elias felt the bond surge as she moved, as if a part of him could feel every strike, every kill. It was intoxicating. Lirien, still weak, pressed a hand to her chest, whispering something under her breath. The air around her hummed, and suddenly one of the guards stumbled, eyes glazing over, before crumpling to the floor. Elias didn't know what the hell she had just done, but it worked. "This way," Seris called, already yanking open the way. Maintenance hatch. Elias pulled Lirien through first, then followed, slamming the hatch behind them. They crawled through the narrow tunnel, the heat from the explosions making sweat trickle down his back. Finally, they emerged into the cold. Night air, the sky above them filled with smoke and streaks of enemy ships. The war wasn't over. It had just changed. Lirien clutched his arm, her breath shallow. "We're free." Seris wiped blood from her face. "For now." Elias inhaled sharply, looking at them, his bondmates, his responsibility. No, he hadn't chosen this life, but now it was his, and he would fight for them. "We keep moving." The stars stretched out before them, dark, endless, waiting. This was only the beginning. Why?